Just like my last videos on this topic, I'm going to start this video off by recapping the summer before the intensive, which I spent, of course, in New York again at the Bolshoi Academy summer intensive program there. So let's just jump right in. My last summer in New York City was beautiful because it was like the last real summer of childhood before I had to grow up and be an adult at age 17. I worked really hard, but I also really tried to enjoy just dancing as a student for the very last time at my last summer intensive ever, and it was really fun. My very first roommate from my very first summer intensive ever at Harrod actually ended up showing up to this summer intensive, which was an incredible surprise because we had stayed in contact. It was pretty much like we'd never left each other when we saw each other again. So that was a really wonderful experience to have her there. I ended up doing a few dances in the final performance that year, but generally that year I really was focusing more on the training aspect of the summer intensive, just because I knew that I was heading into the most intense year yet, trying to mentally prepare myself a little bit, as well as just really trying to enjoy my summer intensive experience before going back to Russia for the year. The best part about the summer intensive that year actually was that my mom ended up being able to come as a chaperone for us to New York, which was really special because we had missed each other a lot during those years that I had been away. It really meant a lot to me that she could share that last kind of childhood experience, students' experience with me before I kind of went out into the big world and started my career journey. So after summer wrapped up, it was right back to school in Moscow, and during my final year, I was lucky enough to be able to arrive in time for the 1st of September starting school ceremony that always happens there traditionally on the first day of school. In this tradition, every single year, the graduating class will give the incoming first class students who've just been accepted to the academy their very first pair of pointe shoes. It's very special and symbolic, and it all happens on the school stage. I was so honored to be taking part in this ceremony. It was very surreal looking across the stage and seeing these young students who were just about to start their journey at the school being on the opposite side of that stage as a student who was finishing her journey at the school. And it's really hard to explain, but going to school in Moscow was one of the biggest dreams in my life. I knew that this specific dream of mine was coming to an end, so it was just a very strange thing to be kind of handing the baton down to another generation of students. At first, when we came back, classes were quite simple because we were all a little bit out of shape after the summer vacation. We had shorter lessons and we didn't really have duet or point class for the first week. We pretty much just focused on remembering the steps that we already knew from the year before. Our teacher really expected a lot from us that year, and I was really glad that my class was quite small because we all got a lot of individual attention and we really knew specifically the things that each one of us needed to work on personally. At the beginning of the school year, I also immediately started working on a variation with my teacher. In the years prior, when we would prepare variations with her, she usually would choose the variations for us just based on what she felt our personal strengths were. But in contrast to that, this year, we would all be choosing our own variations that we really wanted to work on. Usually what she would choose for me was a lot of extensions and sometimes some turns, but this year I wanted to work on something that required a lot more strength. So I chose the Aurora variation, the wedding variation from the Sleeping Beauty, which is a little bit longer than the variations I had done before and required a lot more endurance and a different kind of stamina. So I was excited to start that, and I was interested to see what I could learn from rehearsing that variation. Along with our classes, we started rehearsing for a couple of shows that we had coming up in the coming months. The first show was going to be in October and it would be on the school stage. For that show, I was rehearsing character pieces with my class, as well as the waltz from Sleeping Beauty, which is another group piece. A lot of different students from different levels at the academy were all going to be dancing that together. The next shows we had coming up were a lot more exciting because they were going to be held on the Kremlin Theater, which I had never been to before. There would be two shows celebrating the 240th anniversary of the Bolshoi Ballet Academy. The first show, we would be joined by chosen students from some of the top ballet schools around the world: the La Scala Academy, American Ballet Theater, students from Rome, the Hamburg School, as well as the Vaganova Academy would be coming to dance alongside us. So that was very exciting. And in the second show, arguably a little bit more stressful, we would be dancing alongside ballet stars from around the world as well. The first show on the school stage was performed at the beginning of October. The character pieces that I was involved in were with my class. So we had been either performing them or preparing them for a couple of years. It was much easier to get those ready for this show than the waltz from Sleeping Beauty. Waltz was very challenging because we were also dancing with, as I said, other students from different levels of the academy. Some of them were very tiny and quite fresh. We all had to keep very strict spacing, which was very challenging. Along with that, it was my first dance at school with props. So all the girls were carrying baskets and the boys had these big garlands, which had a metal rod inside of them, and it made them very heavy. So we were all struggling a little bit because not only do you have to think about your steps and the spacing, but you're also thinking about your props and what's going on with them, trying not to hit anyone in the face or drop something. But the show went pretty well, and it was really exciting to start the school year off a month in with a show already. The day after that show, I actually got a ticket to go see the Ballet Stars of the 21st Century Gala in the Kremlin Theater, which was definitely one of the most amazing shows I had experienced up to that point in my life. Being in that theater as well, it was very interesting because we would be dancing in that theater in November, so it was kind of a little taste of how it felt to be inside and what the theater looked like inside. I was absolutely shocked because the Kremlin Theater is enormous. It is so big. There are huge balconies. I don't know how many people it holds, but it almost felt like when you're watching a football game, complete with the big screens on the sides of the stage to show close-ups of what's going on stage, because when you're sitting in the back, like I was actually during that performance, you can barely see what's going on stage. So that's how big it was. It was overwhelming. I was just thinking the whole time, just wondering what it was going to be like being on that stage and looking out into that giant audience. Our shows in the Kremlin Theater were going to be on the 1st and the 2nd of the month, so we were crunching really hard in the studio and on the school stage to prepare the things that we were going to dance. If even one person was out of line at this point, we would just repeat everything until it was all perfect. It was a very intense environment. Along with the waltz from Sleeping Beauty, we were also going to be performing this new character piece that we had just learned called Hungarian Rhapsody. That piece was also a very large piece, a group dance full of kids, and all of them were from different levels. So another spacing nightmare for us to figure out. By the end of each day, I couldn't feel my legs after all of these rehearsals. So in my regular life, I had a little bit more free time than the previous years because after taking the B1 language exam the year prior, Russian classes were not mandatory for us to attend anymore. So I tried to use my time to either study a little bit of Russian on my own or take some time to learn about the audition process and how to prepare a CV and audition materials in general. In some schools, they will help you prepare for auditions during your senior year by maybe teaching you how to create your CV, helping with your photos, or even helping you find and contact places to audition. At Bolshoi Ballet Academy, the process of auditioning is very different for the Russian students because a lot of them are scouted immediately during their exams in their last year at the academy. Directors around Russia from a lot of different theaters will actually attend the exams, which are usually held on the school stage. Afterwards, they'll send an email or a letter to the rector of the school with the names of the people that they would like to either hire for a position in their company or who they would like to invite for another audition at their theater. All of these names of these dancers who they choose are then printed and put on the information board on the first floor for everyone to see. So at that point, my teacher didn't really know very much about international auditions. And so I pretty much had to learn all about that by myself and kind of through trial and error, learn how to prepare my own photos, videos, and my CV, as well as figuring out scheduling so I wouldn't have any problems with any school shows or any exam dates. Usually companies will ask you for a couple of simple photos and a short video, which is pretty much usually either of class, of a performance that you were involved in, or maybe they'll ask you to do a variation and film it for them alongside your CV. And it is also typical for companies to have you pay an application fee, even if you are not accepted to the audition. Just like a lot of things in ballet, auditioning is a pretty costly process because you're also paying for travel arrangements and housing arrangements that you may need while you're there auditioning. Along with all of this, the very first year that you graduate school is probably one of the hardest years to get a job because companies, when they're out a couple of dancers or they're looking for someone new to add to the company, it's a much safer option to go with a dancer who already has experience. They know that that person can perform. Whereas if you're hiring a student, it's kind of a wild card. They kind of have to go through a period of learning about company life and adjusting to living on their own and learning how to pick up repertoire quickly, how class and rehearsals work in the theater, which is a little bit different than in school. It's a very stressful time in a dancer's life when they finish school and have to start putting themselves out there and just going to auditions. One of the best pieces of advice that I actually got that year was your first year auditioning, just apply everywhere. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you get a job and you start working and you start building up your CV. From there, you can try and go to your dream company or wherever else you might want to go. But the most important thing is to just find that first job. A little bit before the shows in November, we were terribly busy with classes, and anytime we were not in class, we were either in rehearsal or sleeping and resting for rehearsal later on in the evening. The closer that we got to the November shows, the tighter the teachers wanted the choreography. Around this time, I had been asked, along with some taller girls from lower courses in the academy, to attend some extra rehearsals for the corps de ballet section of the Shades in Le Bayadère. The Stanislavski Theater in Moscow was going to be performing Bayadère at the end of that month, and they needed tall girls for the back line of the Shades. It was an incredible opportunity, but at this point, my teacher had stressed to me that Sleeping Beauty Waltz and Hungarian Rhapsody were definitely my priorities. Of course, I agreed. It didn't look like that was going to be something that I would be able to do at that point. A little bit before the shows in the beginning of November, the students from the other schools who would be performing with us at the Kremlin arrived to Moscow, and we had the very interesting opportunity of being able to watch them take class on stage on the school stage at the academy. The class was taught by Nikolai Tsitskaridze, who had just recently become the rector of the Vaganova Ballet Academy in St. Petersburg, and who was also a graduate of the Bolshoi Ballet Academy. I just remember being fascinated by the complexity of the class that he gave, as well as the level of the students from the different academies, and how different their technique was from ours in some places. The day of the first show, we had our first rehearsal in the Kremlin Theater. So we had to come in the morning bright and early to fix spacing and lighting and also to get ourselves adjusted to the flat floor because the Kremlin Theater is one of very few theaters in Moscow that has a flat stage rather than a raised stage, which is a stage that is tilted down towards the audience. We were given lunch and dinner at the theater that day, and I wrote in my diary that it was a nice change of palate from the academy meals. So take from that what you will. The first show was just us students. It felt so cool to be a part of that experience, as well as a part of the anniversary of this incredible school. The international students not only danced beautifully, but were really nice. We all were laughing together backstage. The second show was the next day, and we were dancing with the stars. It was so inspiring for us to be able to share this stage with them at that time. All of us students were backstage, just piled up in the wings, looking over each other to watch them as they performed their pieces. Then I remember getting the shock of my life, dancing on stage in one of our group dances and taking a little peek back into the wings and seeing all of them in the same position that we had been in to see us dance. It was just a really cool experience. Since I had been so busy with the rehearsals for the Kremlin shows and all of that great stuff, I had been under the impression that I no longer really had to attend the rehearsals of Le Bayadere because I'd been so occupied. One day after the Kremlin shows, however, my teacher called me over and told me that I'd actually been called to rehearse again that day. So after class, I ran off to the rehearsal of Le Bayadere, and luckily the teacher told me not to worry because since I'd been so busy, I wasn't going to be needed that time, but I probably would be needed later in the year. And so she wanted me to go to the theater with the other students and just be there as a second cast and kind of watch everyone and get my bearings. So I ended up heading to the theater along with the rest of the girls the next day. The next day I went to the theater a little bit later than I should have with another girl from the academy who was doing second cast as well. And she had been to the theater before, so she kind of showed me around. Luckily, we squeezed in right on time, right before the show started, and found our way to the first wing to sit and watch the performance. I was pretty much just there to kind of look at the spacing and make sure that I knew the choreography just in case for the next shows coming up in the season. Being so close to the artists at that point, I definitely gained a different kind of respect for them. It was really interesting and it really made me realize just how much work it is to be a professional ballet dancer. So after our Kremlin shows as well, ballet classes soon started to get progressively harder because we were already preparing for our GOS exams, which is the government graduation exams. We would be taking them in ballet, character, acting, and pas de deux. Our teachers had started setting them already in November just because they had to be perfect. We also learned around this time that my class would be taking 2 of our exams on the school stage and the other exams would be taken in our studios. So ballet would be in a studio, unfortunately, but we had duet and character on stage, which was very exciting. And acting was also in the studio that we had it in a couple of years prior. For duet and character, we were doing classes on stage very early on to get ourselves used to the different kind of a rake and also used to the fact that there is no mirror in front of you on stage and you can't check your lines or your steps or follow your fellow classmates. So it's an entirely different ball game once you get out there. You really do need to practice if you're not used to it. We learned around this time as well that we would be having a couple of shows in December that were just school concerts like every year. They would be held on the 20th and the 25th. Of course, I wanted to perform, but I wasn't really sure that I would get the opportunity this year because it's very competitive to get in. And I was also pretty worried about my foot injury that had been plaguing me for a couple of years. It had been holding up really well up until that point, but I still felt pretty weak. A funny start to December was the Miss Dormitory competition that was held at the hallway in the dormitory. The dorm matrons thought that it would be really fun to do a beauty competition, which turned out to pretty much just be a making faces out of vegetables competition and a hairdo competition. So a group of us girls had to dress up and do these different challenges. It was pretty embarrassing, but I think we all had a good time in the end. So the auditions for the winter concerts fell on a Monday and a Tuesday that year. I ended up having my audition on Monday and I was very nervous. Of course, I was performing the wedding variation that I had been rehearsing from the ballet The Sleeping Beauty. My foot had been acting up a little bit around this time, not in terms of pain, but it was pretty weak still, as I said. The morning of my audition, it was actually feeling so weak that I hadn't been able to put pointe shoes on until I went backstage stage and started warming up for the variation. So I was very nervous. In the end, I just sucked it up and decided, you know what, I'm just going to do my best no matter what happens. And I'm just going to go out there on that stage and dance and enjoy it. I felt like I was doing pretty well. Then we got to the second half of the variation, and Marina Leonova, the rector at the school, ended up picking up her microphone and giving me some soft corrections about my arms during the variation, which at that point I wasn't really sure how to take it. Of course, I was happy for the feedback and I applied the corrections, but when someone starts correcting you while you're doing an audition, it could be seen as maybe not such a good sign. So I finished the variation, came off stage a little bit nervous, but I really did feel like I did pretty well. I felt good about my performance. Apparently, it went pretty well. A couple of different teachers complimented me on my performance, and my teacher was very proud, and she said that I did a really good job and she was really happy with how I did. So I was so happy and relieved, and I felt like even if I didn't get to perform this variation in the show, my teacher said the only thing that mattered was that the other teachers saw us and liked our performances. I was at peace with that performance. A few days later, my teacher pulled me aside after class and she congratulated me and told me that I'd been chosen to dance my solo during the Christmas concert on the 25th, and that it was a huge honor to be chosen this time. I was so relieved and really happy and excited. She was also so excited for me. I didn't want to end up making any kind of mistake or make her feel embarrassed, and I started to get a little nervous as well. Towards the end of the month in December, a lot of students who weren't involved in the concerts started leaving the dorms. Pretty soon it was just a handful of us. By the time Christmas came around and it was my turn to perform, it was pretty much just me in class. So that morning I woke up, I went down to class, and then I ended up waiting around 5 hours before I was called down to prepare for the show. I was pretty nervous at this point because of my foot. Like, I just wasn't confident enough in it. It's always nerve-wracking to be surrounded by so many people who inspire you and not to feel at your most confident or maybe at your best physically. I felt really good at the beginning of the solo. My foot was okay and I was in control of my nerves. But towards the end, I tried to go up for this piqué développé turn and I ended up rolling down on my standing leg instead of staying up on point. And I was so disappointed. Once I got off stage, I just started crying, and I remember seeing my ballet teacher and just kind of running away before she could get to me because I was just so embarrassed and ashamed of myself. Looking back on it, I was way too hard on myself for something that was very small. I had ended up putting so much pressure on myself that anything but a perfect performance was going to be a complete failure in my eyes. And I was sure that my teacher was still proud of me. I really wish I'd had the courage to stay and hear what she had to say. And I think the stress of exams was definitely getting to me already. After the shows and during Christmas break, I had my first audition, which was in Zurich. I was lucky enough to have a couple of friends who lived in Zurich from the Bolshoi Summer Intensive program, and they were kind enough to let me stay with them when I came to audition. The first day I arrived, they showed me around the city a little bit. Zurich is absolutely beautiful. The next day was the audition, and since it was my first audition, I didn't really know what to expect. I arrived at the theater and started warming up, and to my surprise, I saw a couple of people that I knew there, one person from Herod and a couple of girls from the Bolshoi Academy. It was okay as a whole, the audition. The whole class was on point, which was not something that I was used to. I just did the best I could. I'm pretty sure I got cut after center. It was not the place for me, but that was okay. It was good to rip the Band-Aid off and see actually what it's like to be at an audition. So I went home empty-handed, but I did gain life experience. After I came back from that audition, it was pretty much just waiting around until the new year and classes started back up again. On December 31st, we were gonna have a gathering in the big hall where we would eat dinner together and watch the president give a speech on the TV before the big countdown to the new year. It was definitely on brand for all of my previous New Year's celebrations in Moscow. It ended up just being me, the school nurse, the dorm moms, the kids from North Korea, and one girl who was from Japan who'd stayed during the vacation as well. After dinner, we played games to win toothpaste and we drew little papers to see what our fortunes would be for the new year. My fortune said that I would be rich, so I assume that meant in the amount of toothpaste that I owned at that point. But anyway, it was a nice celebration and I was ready to tackle the second half of the year. Winter break hadn't finished yet, and most of the students were not back in the dorms, but around a week before everyone else began the second half of the school year, I had been at Stanislavski Theater every single day. I had finally been called to dance in the last line of the Shades, so me and 7 other girls from the school would go to the theater every day to have class with the company at 11, and then we would stay for rehearsal afterwards. Dancing La Bayadere itself was amazing. The costumes were beautiful and the sets were very intimidating. The most difficult part for me was the arabesques section coming downhill, which if you know ballet and you've seen La Bayadere in any company, then you know there's almost always a prop mountain in the back of the stage, and depending on the company, there will be one or more ramps coming down. So the Shades enter the stage by coming down this ramp as if they were coming down a mountain. It requires extreme focus as well as balance so you don't fall over because you're coming down this ramp on one leg more or less the entire time. And it's also really difficult for endurance because it's a very long, very slow section and you're doing the same step over and over again, usually on the same leg every time. I didn't feel like my center of balance was really where it should be, and I ended up just spending every single intermission of every single show just going down the ramp again and again and again until I finally felt confident in my standing leg to not let me down. When all the shows were finally over at the end of that week, we all agreed that we would miss it. There would be some more shows in March of La Bayadere, but I didn't know at this point when my exams were going to be, so potentially these had been my last shows and I was really grateful that I got to perform them. So January 7th is Russian Orthodox Christmas, and the dorm moms pretty much blackmailed me into doing a little sketch performance in the hallway with another student who was dressed up as Father Frost, and I would be the snow maiden. Traditionally, Father Frost in Russia is pretty much Russian Santa Claus, so he would give a few gifts to the younger students who'd just come back, and it was super cheesy and it was really fun, so I'm happy that they forced me to do that. As classes started back up again, we also began rehearsing for our next set of performances, which were going to be La Fille Mongarde. The Academy performs La Fille Mongarde every single year. Usually the performances were a little bit earlier, but this year they were going to be happening a little bit later. They would be in February, and I had been called to rehearse Lisa's Friends, which I was very excited about because it's a little bit more challenging. It was another opportunity to perform on Bolshoi Theater before I graduated, so I was very happy about that. Since we had a limited time to prepare, we had worked really hard to get everything together, and I did have to get in shape really fast after Christmas break. Of course, along with all those rehearsals and show preparations, I was also thrown back into my rigorous routine of classes, preparing for exams, as well as the ongoing job search, which turned up a couple more auditions in the coming months, so things were going in a good direction. Our exam prep that had started out so challenging had quickly just become the status quo for us. The difficult exercises that I had struggled with so much had become second nature. Along with the long days and nights, I just dragged my body back to my room and passed out. The pressure just became a part of our lives at that point. So in February, of course, we had our shows of La Fille Mongarde. The audience was completely full every show, and the reception was amazing. It was so exciting to be a part of La Fille because I had wanted to dance it ever since I had come to the academy, but the years previously, I had either not been chosen to dance or I had come too late for rehearsals or something like that. So it was really nice to be able to actually be a part of it during my final year in Moscow. My next audition was in Prague, and I ended up going with my roommate from the academy. Prague as a city was absolutely stunning. The morning of the audition, we ended up getting hopelessly lost and had to ask for directions so many times, but luckily we made it to the studios pretty quickly despite all of that, and we had a little extra time to spare to warm up and prepare ourselves. This audition I didn't fare too well. I was cut after class before the repertoire section, but my roommate was actually invited to stay for rep, so I ended up waiting for her until she finished to go back to the hostel. The next morning, we headed back to the academy together. 3 days later, me and the same roommate ended up going to London to audition for the Hong Kong Ballet. The audition was held at the Royal Ballet Upper School Studios. There were so many people auditioning for Hong Kong with us, and we were all crowded into this really small, very hot studio. To my surprise, they didn't ask for much point work actually. We finished the entire class on flat shoes, and then they wanted just a few combinations on point. I felt a lot better in this audition than I had in Prague, but I again was met with no luck and went back to the academy empty-handed again. When we returned from England, we learned that our acting exam would be held on April 3rd, followed by the rest of our exams from April 28th until the 30th, starting with ballet and then finishing with duet and then finally character. April started off with our acting exam. This exam was held in the small studio that we had had our previous acting exam in. It was really challenging because we were very close to the commission and we could see everyone's faces up close, all the expressions, the way that they reacted to what we were doing. We began the acting exam with a little group piece as an opening. Then we went straight into our individual acting pieces. Each girl had at least one solo to highlight her strengths, as well as one or two group numbers where we would work together to tell a story. The pieces that I had chosen with my teacher were Young Juliet, as well as the meeting scene from the ballet Giselle, and a final group number with the rest of my class that was called The Gossips. After our exam was over, our teacher was already really happy with us. She came up to us and said she was really proud of us, which meant so much. She was a very special person in my life, and unfortunately, not long after I graduated, she ended up passing away. She was just one of the best and most unconventional teachers a young dancer could ever ask for. To this day, I still speak of her often and very fondly. During character class one day in April, we had to rehearse our final bows. Since we were taking our character exam on stage, our teacher would sit in the audience during our classes with a microphone and give us corrections and comments like that. The music for our bows that she had chosen was very haunting and like beautiful and kind of sad. As we got up from our final bows, she stopped the music and she was like, "Girls, listen, this is serious. This is your final bow. This is your last time here as students on this stage. So when you lower your arms, both you and the audience have to understand that this is actually what's happening and this is really the end." When we repeated the bows the next time, I think we all started to really understand the heaviness of that moment. For me, coming to Moscow had been one of my biggest and wildest dreams, and just being there was incredible and it was unbelievable. You know, that dream was ending. That was the end of that chapter in my life. It was really serious. It kind of hit me. And for once, my whole class was silent. In ballet class, we had been running our ballet class nonstop for a little while at this point, just like we would during the exam. I was feeling really confident in myself and in my classmates as well. So usually before the Goss exams for ballet, students will get around 2 weeks that are only focused on ballet to make sure that that exam is absolutely perfect, and the other lessons for the other subjects will be postponed until after that exam is already finished. Our teachers were pretty nervous, and so we ended up continuing all of our subjects right up until our ballet exam. Our ballet exam that year would be held on a Monday. Then right after our ballet exam finished on Monday, we would have a duet class. And then on Tuesday, we would have rehearsals on stage for both character and duet. Those exams would be held on Wednesday. So finally, it was upon us. The moment of truth, the ballet exam. Of course, that was the exam that we were all the most worried for. As well as looking for clean, well-executed technique, the commission this year was also looking for artistry, which was different than any of the previous ballet exams that I had taken up to that point. We were expected to be at a very high level. We all walked into the studio together and we watched as some of the most esteemed teachers from the academy took their seats at the front of the studio as our commission and patiently waited for us to begin. Here it was, the culmination of all of our training, all of those hours spent working and striving both in and out of the studio. I so vividly remember just breathing out, and as the music started, my nerves were replaced by this sense of absolute calm. We were really ready to take these exams. As the exam went on, we started to notice that a lot of the commission members had smiles on their faces. They seemed to be enjoying our class. I think that gave me the last little piece of reassurance that I needed, and my whole class just kept up a steadily good class throughout the entire exam. I was so proud of us. It was the most tiring thing that I have ever done in my life, and absolutely the most emotionally rewarding at that point in my life. After the exam, when we went into the adjacent studio to pick up our bags and just take a breather after everything was over, we knew that we'd done something huge. We would never take another ballet exam again. Like, we were finished. The joy was overwhelming. The next day, we had a tiring class and a full run through of both character and duet exams. For character, I wasn't nervous because I never really got nervous for character. I just had so much fun in those exams that it wasn't something that gave me anxiety. But duet definitely bothered me, since after another student had an accident and wouldn't be able to dance for the exams, I had been put in her place for arguably the most challenging part of our exam, which was a piece from the ballet graduation ball. No matter how many times I tried this step, I just could not get it right. I kept falling off my point shoe, and my partner was getting more and more annoyed with me every single time we tried it again. We would stay after pretty much every single lesson and ask for help from our teacher, and even if we got it finally, the next day we'd come back in and it would be lost again, and so it was really frustrating. I knew a lot was riding on that exam because I was right in the middle of the stage and I was very visible. So I spent the evening before the exam just visualizing and trying to figure it out in my head. And I ended up deciding that all I can do is my very best in that moment. And I've been given all the tools that I need to do this right. I can do it. I know I've done it right before. At some point, you just have to let go and just trust yourself. Our duet exam started at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. It was an unusually structured exam because, due to our level, of course, not having a B course, groups A and E were taking the duet exam together. We had to warm ourselves up before the exam because our teacher actually was teaching another class of girls. So we took class very company style, as my friend Elizabeth put it, and then went down to practice some things on stage before the exam started. Of course, I went straight to my partner. Asked him if we could please try that one step again. We tried and it just didn't go any better than usual. I started to get kind of frantic, but he assured me that it was going to be okay. I calmed down a bit right in time for my teacher to announce that the exam was starting and for us all to get into the overhead lift because they wanted to open the curtain. The exam started pretty well. Despite a few minor mistakes, everything was going swimmingly. I knew that graduation ball was coming up. We got to the challenging turn that I had been having so many problems with, and everything went great. It was the best time I think we had ever done it. After that, I was much more calm and just excited to finish that exam and get ready for character. We had a couple of fragments from Don Quixote as well as some jumps, and then our exam concluded with the whole group of A and E together on stage for the grand finale. Character was supposed to start actually immediately after duets, but due to some complications having to do with grading and the commission, we ended up having to start a lot later than we thought. After a grueling hour of waiting around on stage for the commission to return to the audience, our adrenaline was definitely waning and we were exhausted. Our teacher finally came backstage. All of us just took a deep breath and just sucked it up and we went for it. The exam was so much fun. Of course, we started the exam with character bar and then a few group dances. I was also doing a little duet about a girl who was carrying buckets of water on a yoke and a boy who was following her and trying to flirt with her. During the dance, she strings him along and starts flirting back with him, but at the very end, she uses his interest in her to flip things around and gets him to carry the water for her instead. Our ballet teacher, who had been in the audience, gave us a standing ovation and came backstage to congratulate us, which was the most meaningful thing of the whole day. We could not believe that exams were all over. After that, it was just waiting for our marks to come out. We got our duet marks almost immediately, and around 10 minutes after that, we got our marks for character. I was so shocked when I ended up getting top marks for all of my exams that year, and that kind of gave me this extra sense of closure that I hadn't really known that I had needed, to just feel like, okay, I have no regrets about my time here. I can really finally close the book on my experience here and leave this dream behind to go on to the next dream, which was something that was still really hard for me to accept. But after exams were all over, that was the reality that we were facing. In May, I had my next couple of auditions lined up, which were in Portugal and in St. Petersburg. My Portugal audition was in Lisbon with the ballet company there. I was staying with a friend there who was also from the academy, and she showed me around the city, which is absolutely beautiful. I fell in love with Portugal immediately. The audition was really hot and crowded, and I just remember kicking so many people and having to apologize all the time. All in all, it wasn't my best class for sure. And again, there was no luck there, but I tried to just brush it off because I was headed next to St. Petersburg to audition for the Mihailovsky Theater, and I wanted to be in the right headspace for that. Me and another girl from my class, Elizabeta, were auditioning for Mihailovsky together, and I left for St. Petersburg the same day that I came back from Lisbon, which was crazy. St. Petersburg is an absolutely beautiful city, and it has a completely different vibe than Moscow. It was so special to be there because one of my favorite videos growing up when I was young was The Children of Theater Street, about students training at the Bolshoi Academy. So finally, I got to actually visit Theater Street and see the outside of the academy, at least for myself. The audition itself was my first actually private company audition. So me and Elizabeta were taking class with the company. That was humbling because they were all incredible and so many stars were there taking class with us, which was also maybe a little bit distracting. But after class, the director called us over and told us that he would be in touch with us, which at the time I was pretty hopeful about, but we never ended up hearing anything back. In June, I auditioned for the Lithuanian National Ballet in Vilnius, Lithuania. There were a couple students from the academy who had graduated before me who were actually working at the theater, so I was really lucky to have them show me around and kind of tell me a little bit about the repertoire. After the audition, I was called to the director's office where they said that they were very interested in me and gave me a business card and told me to contact them in a little while once I had left school to talk about my possibilities with the company. So that was really promising and I was very excited about that. My second to last audition on my European audition circuit was in Bordeaux, France. The audition itself was really tiring because there had been so many applicants that they ended up splitting us into two groups. And of course, I was in the second group. The second group ended up waiting for a pretty long time in the dressing room, just warming up over and over again until they finally called us upstairs, and I felt the audition went very well. I had a great time. Elizabeta from the academy was also there with me again that time. Again, though, we ended up never hearing anything back, which was disappointing. So my final audition was actually in Warsaw. Once I got to the theater and did the audition, I made it through both class and the repertoire section. Ultimately, they didn't have enough contracts at that time to offer me a job, so I ended up going back to Moscow empty-handed again and a little bit concerned for the future at this point. My final days in Moscow were really beautiful, but also really hard. I began to see the end coming when my mom was finally able to come to Moscow to visit me for the first time. It was so nice to share with her the place where I had been living and working so hard for so long, and she got to meet all of my friends and the people that she'd been hearing about for years. It was really nice to have her there, and it really made me feel a little bit more ready to leave. It was like I finally had closure. After she left, I just wanted to spend my last couple of weeks visiting all of my favorite places one last time and spending time with my friends who I'd be leaving. It felt like no time had passed at all, but it had been 3 years and it was finally time to say goodbye. Towards the end, our numbers dwindled in the dorms because our graduation ceremony was scheduled for very late in June, and everyone who was not in the graduating class just ended up going home. Goodbyes were really hard because we didn't know if we would see each other again. During our last ballet class, Pyatkina started crying and we finished class in just a big group hug. She wished us all the best and made us promise to keep in touch with her. It was sad since we knew we'd never study with her again, and it was really strange because we had all seen each other almost every day for the past 3 years. I didn't end up staying for the graduation ceremony, which was sad to me, but also I needed to get home and spend some time with my family, hopefully before I joined a company in the fall. On my last night, a little group of people from my class went to take a walk to one of the bridges near the school where we could see the skyline. It was the weirdest feeling, like I was leaving home again. It was the end and also the beginning of the rest of our lives. I'm so proud to say that I studied at the academy and so honored to have shared the studio and the stage with everyone I met and grew close to. I was excited, not only for my future, but for the futures of all my friends and my classmates as well. When I first arrived home after leaving Moscow, I was pretty stressed out just because of the lack of concrete answers from some companies and the concrete negatives from other companies. Around a week passed before I got some news, so I checked my email like usual and I saw that I'd received a message from the Polish National Ballet. Upon opening it, I learned that a spot had opened up and I had been offered a corps de ballet contract with the Polish National Ballet. Finally, all the hard work had paid off and I was on my way to my first job as a professional dancer. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It's been such a cathartic experience for me to share my story and my journey. I will see you in the next video.
Harlem Shake.